And we're live. Tom, Sauer, good to see you, man.
We made it. Good
to see you
again.
live, dude.
Yeah, this is cool.
Yeah, man. What were you going to say?
I've watched a lot of your shows you've done with Brian Callen, especially. I like that a lot. That was really good. He's
great.
Dude. I like his stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, he's real intelligent. I like and wise too. I like when people mix intelligence and wisdom.
Yeah. Yeah, he talked a lot about wisdom.
Oh, you do?
No, he did. He talked a lot about wisdom, and then also it's that he has that skill where he can actually be pretty intellectual and have some wisdom, but he's also funny as hell. And he's not a 90-pound weakling either. It's a good set.
I've been thinking a lot about it because, first of all, I want to introduce people that don't know who you are. You run Miramar Health. You founded it, which is like an organization that's focused on rehabilitating veterans. Maybe you can explain it better. Like, what exactly do you guys do?
Yeah, so we are a very intensive mental health treatment company. We're exclusively for veterans. So I was in the military for most of my adult life. And I started with my partner. Actually, we met in college at the Naval Academy when we were there. I was enlisted in the Marines for a few years. I was an infantry guy and then went to Naval Academy. My partner is Colin, who you've met before a couple of years ago when he was on the show on Timcast. And he's the smart one. So while I was getting in trouble and, on restriction, he was in his room studying and getting good grades and going to church a lot. And but we reunited about 5 years ago, and we started the company we got a couple other small investors, and we started the company. It was very small, just one little location out of literally the clinic was out of an old tire shop in Costa Mesa, California. So I'm here. I live in Newport Beach. And since then, 5 years later, we've expanded. We've got 8 locations here in California. And we just last week, I was actually in Central Florida outside of Orlando, and we just opened Valor Lakes, which is our new project out there. Same basic concept, but just we're trying to do it bigger and better. So we've got a 9,000 square foot facility out there. And then late this year or early next year, we'll open up. We just recently bought a 57-acre lakefront horse property out there in Central Florida. We're going to plan to do equine therapy as well, and it's got a 6,000 square foot farmhouse, and we can bed a lot of guys there, so they'd stay there for really long periods of time. So the guys that we're helping are not. I mean, and just to preface this, I know way more guys that I worked with, that I was in the military with, that we either have died due to suicide or addiction, or whose lives have been totally destroyed by them. Way more of those guys I know that we've lost than overseas on the battlefield. Way more. I mean, and I think you ask anyone who's been in the military for more than a minute, they'll tell you pretty much the same. So we saw that need. And so then several years ago, we got a contract with the VA, Department of Veterans Affairs. So we're a community care provider. So we do almost all of our work is done through the VA. So we are like an alternative to someone who seeks care at a VA hospital. In many cases, depending on the capacity of a VA hospital or their capabilities, or in some cases the need of the veteran, they can be referred out to a place like ours, either here in California or eventually in Florida.
Does their insurance through the VA cover everything?
Yeah, the guys don't. I say the guys and gals, but it's vast majority of guys. I'd say about 96% of our folks who come through are guys. Zero out-of-pocket costs. So everything comes through the VA.
I want to test something. I don't normally do this. Do you like how this looks better? Are you watching?
I'm fine. This works.
I kind
of
like this. I don't know if this is always going to work, but I want to do this for this so I can see your face a little better. And now my face is gigantic. So, dude, when it comes to mental health of people that have retired, is it a lot of is part of it that what American military has done the last 20, 25 years since the incursions into the Middle East? Is it what have I done kind of mindset?
There's some of that, but honestly, man, the vast majority of it, it's people are people. And whether you're in the military or not, we've gotten a number of guys who had, had a rough time overseas, put it that way. But we also got a ton of guys who were kind of didn't like, I deployed a lot, did some kind of wacky stuff, but I mean, I didn't have the typical, OIF, OEF veteran experience. I was one of the few guys who didn't go to Afghanistan in my line of work. And my line of work was I was on the bomb squad. And, which is like, when you think like Hurt Locker, all that, like Iraq and Afghanistan and whatnot, that was kind of my line of work. Most of my time was spent out in the Pacific, out in Japan, Korea, Philippines, stuff like that. But the thing is, though, the vast majority of the guys we have, it's usually always due to trauma. We look at especially addiction as not so much like the problem. It's like a symptom of a deeper problem. And it's almost always trauma. And like, look, and also I got to preface this, like disclaimer, I have no letters behind my name. I'm not a doctor, not a therapist. I'm not a clinician. We employ a ton of amazing ones. But so when I'm speaking here, I'm kind of speaking more as an individual. This is not me speaking as any, because I'm not any of those things. But from what I've observed and what I'm told by all my staff, who I talk to all the time, is that the vast majority of the time, it's like childhood trauma. And it kind of makes sense if you think about it, because for a lot of these guys, when many of them, when they join the military, they're usually getting the hell out of Dodge, especially the ones we deal with. They didn't have a great situation back home. And whether it was a family situation, they were in a town that just, there's no, it was a dead end. They might've had a lot of trauma, but they didn't have time to process it. And frankly, that happened to me. It took me a while to really understand that. So part of the reason I got involved in all this was my dad, who's not a veteran, my stepfather was, and he was a cop later, but my father struggled with addiction and mental health, depression, all sorts of stuff his whole life. And about 3 weeks before I left for the Marine Corps, when I was enlisted, and this was 5 days before I graduated high school, he died of a drug overdose, which totally sucked. And he struggled his entire life. And when it happened, I can't say I was terribly surprised, obviously saddened. But then, my ass got kicked into adulthood. I just didn't have time to deal with it. Like, we had a funeral, and then next thing I know, I had to get ready. I was leaving for the Marines, and then there I was, a couple weeks later at Marine Corps boot camp down in San Diego. And I just didn't really have much time to process it or really grieve or deal with it. I was, it's a pretty busy lifestyle especially when you're a young guy who's 18 years old, and joins the Marines. So a lot of guys like that, put it that way. Is
there any time while you're enlisted to process stuff like that? Or is it just so mission focused?
I cried in my rack.
What I mean? The rack? What's your rack? I'm pretty newbie at all the.
Sorry, it's a military term, and Navy
barrack.
Your rack being your bed. A rack is called a bed in the Navy and the Marines. I was in my rack, in the big squad bay, like what you see about like the movies. I would just every once in a while sit there and that was about it.
Cry in your sleep ever? I've done that.
A little bit. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, sometimes I wake up like that. It was fine. But it's one of those things where, the Marine Corps doesn't really give a shit about your feelings most of the time. At least back then, probably not now either. Especially when I was in the infantry. I was a rifleman, like we don't, nobody's really interested in, especially when, when I joined, there wasn't any war. I joined in 99, pre 9/11. Nobody cared about your problems. No. You were not there. You're an instrument of the government. That's it.
When you exited, did you go through like therapy, like processing therapy for a period of time?
Yeah, later I did. I did. Is actually that wasn't until after college, and I was an officer in the Navy, and you're a little more grown up. You got a little bit of time. You're a little more professionalized, and yeah, I dealt with all that, and like everyone, not everyone, but like a lot of people in the military, dealt with divorce. All that stuff, that's not, I don't think there's anything particularly unique. And I got to say though, that I had the time of my life in the military. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And the only real reason I really wanted to get out was I wasn't having fun anymore because I got commissioned, right? When you get commissioned, when you become an officer, right? I was an enlisted guy. I was a private first class that made it to sergeant. And then I got selected for the Naval Academy, which is, it's kind of a big deal at the time. Nobody in my family went to college like that or anything like that. So then when I went there, and it was just one of those things where I didn't really want to think about processing some of these things or dealing with some of those issues, and I just had so much fun though. I mean, I was on a ship, I was traveling the world. It was a tough job. Sometimes it sucked. Yeah. And then I transferred into EOD, explosive ordnance disposal. We're the special operations bomb squad. I did amazing work with like cool organizations, and it was just absolutely incredible. And I was on this cool task force, top secret clearance, nuclear weapon. We were doing nuclear weapons, and it was amazing. Jumping out of planes, they taught me how to skydive. I went scuba diving with my friends, shooting guns, blowing shit up. Traveling all over Asia, and then they sent me to business school. I mean, it was like I loved it. I had a great time. But as you move up the ranks, you kind of like you stop doing the fun stuff. You're no longer with the boys doing stuff. It's desk jobs and cubicles and PowerPoints and email and spreadsheets, and it's essentially just like any other civilian government job or corporate job. And that's kind of why it wasn't as fun anymore. And I wanted to do something different.
That mirrors my father's experience in the fire department. He worked his way up to lieutenant, and they were like, "We want to make you a captain." And he was like, "I love fighting fires. I don't want to sit at a desk. No thanks." Yeah. He just retired as a lieutenant.
Yeah, that happens a lot. And I know that like in a lot of organizations, I got one friend from the Navy who is actually in the FBI now, has been for a while. And, discussions about the FBI aside is one thing that's interesting that they do. They're trying to get away from it though, is that, hey, if you just want to be like on a squad and like bust drug dealers and bad guys and whatnot, like you can do that your whole career. You won't make as much money as if you go up the management route, but you'll still get to do that. And there are guys within federal law enforcement, apparently, I'm told, that can do that. But in the military, no way. Especially as an officer, it's like up or out. You have to move up. And yeah, you kind of have to like move up, because the way the personnel system is like, hey, we have all these junior officers. We have X number of junior officers, but we need to create Y number of mid-level managers. And then they got to move up to create Z number of like senior officers. So like there's you've got to kind of move up or out. And depending on what manning looks like and recruiting, but everyone talks about the recruiting crisis in the military these days. The bigger issue than just recruiting is actually retention, is getting guys to stay in, because you can't, there's a certain amount of like institutional knowledge that shows up that you can't just buy it. You can't outsource it. You can't, in order to create, a senior enlisted guy to lead soldiers or Marines or sailors in certain parts of the military, like those guys have to be grown. They can't be, you can't just go buy one from the outside. It's really hard. So that's a big issue. But just with the manning and whatnot, that was just my time. And I just wanted to do something different. And
can you slow your way up the chain and kind of be like, yeah, maybe in a couple years? Or is it like, yo, bro, it's your time. We need you to step up so we can bring you guy to train?
I mean, you can do it, but the thing is, a lot of guys, what they can do is at a certain point, they can choose certain jobs that are not very career enhancing. And usually they're fun. It's like, you go work at like on the staff at NATO, or go work at an embassy, or go do, but it's not like the career track. And those guys kind of, when they do that, I got a buddy of mine he's out now, and he's got his own company these days. But at the time, he was a helicopter pilot, and he loved flying, but he just didn't want to stay in forever. He's pretty disillusioned with the military for a lot of the same reasons many people are. And he's like, I don't want this. A job came for him where he's on like the NATO staff in Italy, and he got to move his wife and his kid. And they went and spent 4 years in Italy. He became fluent in Italian, but it's like not a career enhancing job. And he just knew he wouldn't get selected for the next rank. And he knew it. And he was like, good, time for me to get out. He had a great time. He spent 4 years living in Europe and traveled everywhere. Not bad. But I mean,
and then just retired after
that? He didn't retire. He just got out. Yeah, usually you have to stay in for about 20 years to retire, and he'd got out around like 6 or 7 ish.
Dude, was the bomb squad like you would be full gear coming up on something, and you're like, this might blow me up? Like, it is and it isn't. So like you always look at like putting on the suit. That's like a last resort. That's always something where it's like, hey, we want to send the robot first, right? And it always depends on the situation. That's one thing that actually EOD taught me so well, is how to be a proper filter and how to like screen out bullshit, right? Where it's like, okay, what is the thing that can get me or my friends hurt
right now. That's why am I here? That's why we're here right now. Okay, if that isn't, if any of these other issues or problems going on scene somewhere, if that's not being dealt with, if it doesn't support that, or if it interferes with that, get the hell out. I'll talk about it later. And we have they teach you certain categories of situations, right? Like a category C incident would be like, hey, we found some bomb that fell off of a helicopter or a plane, like a piece of ordnance, like a missile fell off. It's out in the field in the middle of nowhere, right? Like as a hypothetical, right? Out in the field in the middle of nowhere, nobody's coming near it. We just say, okay, cordon that off. Don't tell anyone to come there. And then we'll get to it. We'll get around to it when we can. Just keep the area clear. Next one would be like a category B, where it's like, hey, this is impeding things, right? Where it's like, hey, this is like a main supply route, or like this is near critical infrastructure. Then we'll clear the area out. We take it more seriously. And sending a guy downrange in a bomb suit based on the situation, that's kind of meant to be like, hey, we'd rather send the robot. And then you have the very, very rare ones, which is called a Cat A. And a Cat A means it's like, this is talking about somebody strapped with a suicide vest, right? Where it's like a hostage, or we call it a hostage device, which is like out of the movies, which does happen. Very rare, very rare. I mean, I've only known of one guy that I ever knew that dealt with anything like that. He was attached to the SEALs, and they did a hostage rescue, and the hostage had a bomb near her. And, but that at that point, it's like, you taking care of that problem is more important than your life. Go do it. And we train, I never did anything like that. I mean, I'm very fortunate. I never got shot at or blown up or anything like that. But, I know a lot of guys that did. And those situations you hear about, it's like we train for them all the time, which is really fun. It's like this high level problem solving, but like with dire consequences. And you kind of learn to slow down, think, let's talk about it. Nobody's shooting at us right now. It's not a ticking time bomb, so to speak, with, a busload of orphans next to it. And they're all locked in the bus. You know what I mean? And you learn to do that. You learn when you have to make a quick decision and when you don't have to make a quick decision. We can stop, come up with options. The whole purpose is preservation of life and property in that order. So yeah, that kind of thing. I loved it. It was the greatest time ever.
I think about that metaphorically. I mean, it's nothing the stakes are nowhere near as high as the military, but talking on IRL, the things we talk about, sometimes it feels like this is the most important thing in the world, but you got to slow down to be able to understand what this thing is. And you don't have to solve it in 2 hours. It's okay to think about it and maybe talk a little slower.
Take the emotion out when you can. And especially some things you guys talk about, they're very emotional. I mean, it's very emotionally charged when there are matters of, really important values or threat to life and livelihood. Yeah, it matters.
Would you guys do meditation in the military before missions and things? Or
they didn't tell. No, we were pretty, by the book on a lot of things. But I mean, the training he had was awesome. And I gotta say, one thing that's kind of cool that I thought was one of the coolest things I ever did is I went into, in EOD, I did one deployment. We call it a vanilla deployment, which is where I was on an aircraft carrier. Actually, it's that aircraft carrier, USS George Washington, based out of there. And it was just a standard deployment. I was like the EOD officer assigned. We worked for the whole strike group. So I worked for the admiral that was on board and all the ships. We were just like EOD and divers on hand if we needed them. We did a couple of things.
What is EOD?
Oh, explosive ordnance disposal, bomb squad. So that's what it means, right? And so then, but after that deployment, it's kind of where you're like, okay, you get your ticket punched, and my unit decided that okay, well, Tom is not, an idiot, so we're gonna give him a little more responsibility. I went over to the special operations side and of EOD, which blew my mind. I mean, so it was cool. We were part of all those task forces you hear about. I'm not going to talk about it too much, but I read on the internet about cool organizations like Joint Special Operations Command and SEAL Team 6 and Delta and all those guys. And so if you think about it, right, if you were to read on the internet that there were SEAL Team 6 or Naval Special Warfare Development Group, right, is what I read on the internet is their official name, is that it's, the counterterrorism force, right? Well, what's the greatest terrorist threat to America? I would say if somebody were trying to sneak in a weapon of mass destruction, a nuclear weapon, right? Like an either a stolen warhead or improvised nuclear device into Manhattan or the Beltway, LA, you name it, or something like that. Well, there's a very large EOD contingent at those organizations, and that's what we refer to as the no-fail, high-dollar mission. So I got to go through all this awesome training. I mean, I spent weeks at Los Alamos National Lab and Sandia National Lab learning about, like, one, how these things actually work and what to do when you deal with them. And then after that, our next deployment, we were attached to a special operations unit, an Army special operations unit, actually, that was deployed to the Pacific Theater. And our main job, we were based out of Okinawa, and our main job was kind of twofold. One was to be like on call for all major like terrorist incidents in the Pacific, right? Which there really weren't that many of. Like back in the 90s, there was a big hostage deal with in the Philippines with Abu Sayyaf. But then afterward, our other mission was we go and do exercises with other foreign friendly special operations units. So I got these things like I was with the Australian SAS, the New Zealand SAS, the Korean 707. I mean, awesome dudes. It was really cool stuff. I loved it. And I mean, it was like, you know, I finally got to do that cool high speed, you know, jumping out of planes. I got night vision and, you know, all that crap. And it was like, it was great. And I very much felt like a spectator. I had total imposter syndrome. And there's a couple of times we're doing something. I'm like, look over to like one of my guys. I'm like, this is pretty badass, you know? And they're like, yeah, okay, okay, I know. Okay, yeah, chill. You know, I mean, because I very much felt like a normal dude who just got thrown in with these guys who are some of the most impressive Americans you'll ever meet in your entire life. You know, it was awesome. I loved it.
Was it like they would attach an EOD unit to like a foreign company or something, or foreign
exercises? So we would just train. What we would do is we'd train together and we'd have like pretty cool problems. We have guys from like the national labs who would bring out like a mock-up of a nuclear weapon, and they'd even include a little bit of radioactive sources in there just so our like monitors, our little sensors could pick it up, and we have to like find it. And it was awesome because it was like, hey, we got intelligence somewhere here. And it was like, and one time when I was with the Australians, they hid it in a parking garage of like a junior college outside of Sydney. And like all of our guys, we had to go find it. It's a lot more than just us. I mean, it was us, the Australian SAS, the Australian Special Operations Engineer Regiment, which is like our counterparts, the Special Operations EOD guys who are Australian, and then like the Australian Commandos, which are kind of like the Rangers. And we had to like go find it, cord it off, and like, you know, police support us. They cleared the whole area out. And then like we had to go in, like go deal with it. And it was like a 55-gallon drum. I had this really cool like communications kit that we could like pipe in, either shoot it up to a satellite that doesn't officially exist, or we could like tunnel into like an existing cell network, do a bunch of encryption, and it would like, and I'd have like a little video on my Panasonic Toughbook that would like, I have a camera pointed at the item and one in my face, and that would pipe into Los Alamos National Lab, Fort Bragg, you know, Joint Special Operations Command, you know, that other Navy unit that we work with, and then it would even pipe in like Pentagon and the Situation Room of the White House, and they'd play along like it was like a big national exercise because it's meant to show like all the senior people, like, hey, if some shit like this goes down, we got to actually be able to have the communication set up. Okay, we're doing this, and like the guys at Los Alamos would look up on the screen. They had this cool little Dr. Evil command center that they showed us months prior before we went out and did all this, where it was like they got a bunch of these scientists on call. They'd take a look at all the readings we'd send over, you know, and then we have a picture of it. We'd have to take X-rays. By the way, taking an X-ray of something that's radioactive is very difficult because the radiation washes out the film. So like that's difficult. There's techniques we learned to do that. And then they would look at it and they would tell us, you know, oh, that's nothing. It's not going to work. Or they could look at it and be like, ooh, it looks like they're trying to make something, but it's not complete yet. Or worst case, they'd say, oh, you guys are fine. Just stay right there. Keep working. You guys are fine. That means we're fucked. So, you know, we always joked around. We're like, hey guys, if we ever had to actually do our jobs, we'd probably all fucking die, but we wouldn't hurt. We wouldn't feel anything, right? That was like what we, you know, morbid humor. but it was like the coolest thing ever. It was like working with all these big national task forces. It was neat. I loved it.
And that's like if you had to disarm a nuclear bomb, basically.
What?
That.
Yeah, I mean, our option. I don't want to get too much into it, but it kind of come down to like we could provide options to the Secretary of Defense. Leave it at that.
I like it. When you talk about using robots, like obviously for communications, you got cameras. That's a good usage. But like, are they, and if it's classified, that would be cool too. But like, are they good enough to go in with like little fingers and pull wires? And
there's all these different robots out there. So we usually roll, it depends on the type of team you're on. But like at the time, I'm not sure what they're doing now. My brother's an EOD officer. He's still active duty. He likes the desk job. But we had two ones. One was called a Talon, which you might have seen from like Hurt Locker. It's a big black, got tank treads. It's got a big arm. It's got a camera in an arm. And you could use that. And it's actually very strong. You could use it to like rip wires, cut things, do shit, right? And we had a couple other ones too that are a little bit smaller, more mobile. It had a cool little arm with like 3 or 4 different joints, so you could like twist around and manipulate things. And actually, you'd operate with an Xbox controller. You actually had it was like they would take one of those with a screen, and we even would have like we call it the Robot Olympics, like for our training. Where all of a sudden we set up obstacle courses, like really good training. Like how can you manipulate this thing to do what you want? Because it's a lot harder than it looks. It's not like just a video game. Kind of is one, but like a really shitty video game where, you don't get to respawn. You know what I mean? Where it's like that. And so, going over this obstacle, look around this corner, do this, do that. Yeah, it's pretty cool. And so
were they good enough?
Ones.
What's that?
They have all sorts of different ones out there.
So are they good enough? Like if they get knocked over, they can get back up, kind of thing? Or would it be like this one's out of commission, start over?
There's one that could use its arm to push itself back up. Others couldn't. One thing I thought was really funny was we did one time I went to this conference in India where it was the Indian National Security Guard, which is kind of like their internal military, because in India, at the time at least, I think pretty much the same now, they had all sorts of problems with like terrorists, IED incidents. There's also there's a Maoist insurgency in like the southeast of India. Yeah, they're called the Naxalites. They're like Maoists. And so they deal with IED crap all the time. At the time when I went through those, like 2013, it was like a problem. Maybe it had been for a long time. And so what's hilarious, it's kind of like a fucked up sense of humor, but they gave a brief to us on this big incident they had in Hyderabad. And it was a big Hindu festival. And I guess apparently a lot of like Muslim extremists, we'll say, bad guys, set bombs all over this big, huge festival. The whole town was out. They set bombs all over the place, and they were all in these red propane tanks. So a bunch of them went off, but a bunch didn't. They dud fired, right? And so they showed the incident of them prosecuting all of these IEDs that had dud fired, because some might have gone off. And they showed us all these pictures. This blew my mind. They showed me this one picture, like up on the big screen in this like auditorium at the Indian Army headquarters, and it showed a picture of an Indian EOD tech. We train a lot of these guys, right? But like after we train them, they kind of go do their own thing. He was in a bomb suit, but he had that visor up, right? So he flip it up. He had the visor up, and it was a close-up shot. And it was him sticking like pliers, little hemostats, into this propane tank to like pull wires out. And I'm looking at this, and I look over to the American and the Brit I was with. I'm like, what the hell is that? Why is he doing that? Why is his visor up? Who took the fucking picture? Right? Where it's like, who's there like while this guy's like working on a bomb? And then I remember I asked the question, and I was scolded by my American partner who was with me. He was like, don't ask those questions, man. And I'm like, okay. But my question was like, why didn't you send the robots? Like we'd sold them like a dozen robots. And, the US had like, why didn't you guys use the robot? And what he immediately said, the officer in charge was, that robot cost us $120,000.
Send the Indian guy. Yeah.
We'll just send a private down there. That's fine. I'm not using that robot. That's expensive. We'll send a guy down there. And then and then I'm like, good. And he's like, don't ask that question, because the worst thing you want to do is like make them look bad. Right. Because then the thing is you don't want to, this sounds strange, but it's like the main purpose we go to these things is like to kind of gather intelligence. It's not like we're spies, but we want to like, I mean, it's like what we call open collection. We want to learn, what is everyone else doing out there? Right. And like learn about things and trade stuff. It's like, if you make them look bad, we're not getting invited back. So we want to keep coming. So you just, okay, fine. Okay. I'll smile. I'll be quiet now.
And then later in private, they'll get like feedback and be like, next time,
maybe,
keep the visor down.
Even then, we just kind of smiled and nodded, because even if I told them, hey, maybe you should use the robot, they'll say, okay, cool, thanks. You know, like, you know, life is cheap for a lot of those folks, you know, in that side of the world.
I was wondering about Miramar as we're talking. Yeah. I'm probably bounce around topically.
No, it's fine.
Love talking about this shit. Like equine therapy, working with horses. I was just talking to some dude about heart math, or like the electromagnetic field produced by the heart and like the horse's heart. And it has like some healing properties, like the way the heart, I don't know if it's vibrating or whatever, but these magnetic fields produced by the human heart, and apparently like the horse's heart can really heal humans. But I don't know what
the hell that is. I agree. I mean, I've heard similar, you know, and we haven't started doing it yet. We will though soon. I mean, it's a big part of what we want to do. We're sharing a property with a horse farm and a nonprofit there. So that's going to be like, to the veterans going through our treatment, you know, it'll be transparent to them. But yeah, and you have to get like special certification for equine therapy and whatnot. But a lot of it sometimes just comes down to the simple fact of like taking care of another creature, right? Like of another animal, and just kind of like having a bond. Because a lot of the guys who are having it's I guess it's a creature that, you know, can show affection, that doesn't judge you. I think that's a big part of it. And again, I mean, I'm not speaking from any personal experience, or like I'm not a clinician, but you know, this is what I've been told. And you kind of create a bond with that animal. I mean, you get the same thing with, in my opinion, I mean, I'm more of a dog person than a horse person, but I know a lot of folks that love it and are like, okay, hey, if this works, like, let's do it. This is a perfect fit. But I think it just comes down to like being able to kind of bond with another creature in a really positive way. And also being able to take care of another creature and being responsible for them. Apparently that does a hell of a lot of good. So, yeah, I mean, it really does.
Purpose. I don't have kids, but I imagine it's similar, like watching a child eat or the cat eat. You're like, I saved that life by bringing it food.
Yeah, I got a buddy of mine who is doing great now, but a number of years ago, he was not. He was a Marine infantry officer in Afghanistan, had a really rough go. And when he came back, he had all the predictable problems, you know, drinking, you know, a little suicidality, you know, got divorced, all the bad things. Right. And we were really close. And he told me that it was his dog, because in the divorce, he kept the dog, and the dog's still around. And he was like, the dog saved my life, because I knew that I had to get up out of bed. I had to take her out. I had to feed her. I had to take care of her. And like she took better care of me than I really ever took care of her, is one of the ways that he put it. So I think there's something to, and also loves you, you know, and doesn't judge you.
I get that feeling about doing this show in the afternoon. Sometimes I'll be like, I have a purpose that I have to. I have to have rest at night. I have to be fresh. I have to keep my mind clear. Like, keep going. I've got something to do.
Yeah. And can I say something, dude? I'll tell you what, man. I remember before I went on Timcast for the first time, I watched his show. And this is something I learned about. And this is why, one of the reasons why and I'm not just blowing smoke up your ass, but I am, is like why you're one of the most impressive folks out there on the internet, right? That I see, is every once in a while, I would first hear you, like, you talk about, say something, and I'm like, is he high? Like, or it's like you would come out with some like not out of left field, right? Like kind of crazy ideas or thoughts, and like didn't expect that coming. And at some point, I'm like, this guy sounds like some stone college sophomore. But then I'm like, then I stop, and I'm like, well, wait a second. Actually, that's not that crazy. Oh, maybe it's not that. No, that's actually not that crazy. Maybe I'm the one who's got to stick up my ass, and I'm not thinking about things differently. And also I look at the idea of like brainstorming, you know, like I'm a big fan of, like, I think maybe when you were on Malice's show, you might've talked about this, or when Malice was on one of your shows, is how it's like brainstorming is great, because sometimes when people throw out really different, you know, out of the box ideas, many of which at first might seem kind of wacky. But the thing is, though, is sometimes those like wacky ideas might lead you to think of something that actually this isn't that wacky, and might you think of something different. And oh, by the way, you're probably one of the most genuinely nice, sincere, like real people on the internet. So yeah, I mean, it's like super impressive.
Yeah, it's the willingness to be humiliated, to be stupid. Then someone else might hear that idea, and it's like, okay, that wasn't right, and you do look like a fool for saying it, but it makes me think of this thing that is right. And so to be willing to be the idiot, to be the one who's like, well, at least I've started a conversation about this.
100%, dude. And that's why it took me a few episodes to watch where I was like, who's this guy? And then after a while, I'm like, wait a second, it's my own hubris and my own like conventional thinking that did it.
And also your own perception, because for the record, I was high for about 20 years. And I hear that stuff stays in your fat cells for like, I don't know, seven years or something. So I still get the benefits of it.
Right. Yeah. Hey, also that's one thing as well. People always talk about weed. Like, look, I don't think weed is in the same category as fentanyl, but I don't think weed is cool. I don't think it's good, man. Like I mean, I don't know how much you do. I'm not saying it's like never, ever, the devil's tobacco or anything like that. But I mean, I don't think it's like some sort of like medicine or wonder drug. I mean, maybe for some folks it helps, but if people are out there smoking weed all the time, it can be a problem. Not for everybody, but for a lot of people.
My experience anecdotally is it's about dosage, probably with every kind of medicine, whatever, psychedelics or pharmaceuticals. If you dose on it, you're fucked. And like weed, it's very easy to overdose. Like if you feel stoned, you've overdosed. So like the tiniest bit, all of a sudden you focusing of a lens, if you over focus it, it gets blurry again. So you got to get just a little bit to see it a little clearly.
I get that. Yeah.
Speaking of Miramar, are you guys, I want to know all the treatment modalities. What kind of stuff are you utilizing? Psychoactives or any of that stuff?
So, trust me, is one of the things that we do. So like I'm also like fairly active on Capitol Hill for this, just kind of doing like advocacy. I testified before House Veterans Affairs Committee back in April of last year. Well, that was a cool bucket list item. Never thought I'd testify for Congress, And we were not, at the time, it wasn't about the psychedelic piece, but we're also in pretty close contact with what's actually referred to as the Psychedelic Caucus, which is like, they always have little groups within congressmen like, hey, let's push some legislation forward. And we, obviously for licensing purposes and regulatory reasons, we cannot dabble in that at all. I mean, we can't, but we are very strong advocates for that once it is not just legalized, but more importantly, it's about being clinically indicated in a controlled environment when it's done responsibly, because, that's a whole nother thing. And once that happens, we're getting close. I mean, we've already made a lot of leaps forward moving forward with MDMA therapy, ketamine, all that. I think MDMA is a really good first step. And later on, I think next up is psilocybin. And also it's like one of the things where I'm not just like, saying nice things. I put my money where my mouth is. There's an organization you might have heard of called VETS, VETS, Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions, started by Marcus and Amber Capone. Strongly recommend everyone, checks them out and supports them. Mike Cernovich and I each sponsor with 2 years in a row now. They have a big gala in San Diego, and one big advocate for a lot of that is Dan Crenshaw. And he actually came and spoke at it. At the big event, it was like Dan Crenshaw and Andrew Huberman were there. It was pretty cool. But they're really focusing on lobbying efforts, but then also they're sponsoring special operations veterans for that treatment. And then they'll send them down to Mexico, usually, for that.
That's what VETS is the name of the company,
VETS. And then also two of my employees, I say employees, are members of the team, who are both former special operations guys. One was a SEAL for about 14 years. He testified alongside me. And then another guy was a Marine recon medic. And he's also a therapist nowadays. Now he is. But we sent them both to the MAPS course. MAPS is, acronym escapes me, but the organization is started by Rick Doblin, right?
Multidisciplinary something, psychedelic something. It's
Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, I think.
I love it. Rick Doblin.
Yeah. So they sponsor training courses, right? To like how to actually administer and perform the treatment, and very involved. And they're kind of the gold standard. And what's crazy is when we sent the one guy on the team, the former SEAL, he went through there and he's like, there's like 50 people in this course. It was in New York, and about 40 of them were all in the VA. They were all VA doctors, VA psychiatrists and therapists, which is really good news. And so they're doing is trying to get that training up so it's ready, so that, including us, so that as soon as like the green light flashes, we can immediately start offering that treatment. But but we want to do it right. It's like, that's the thing, guys, because like some of this stuff is not done correctly. There are a lot of guys in the space who are who are clinicians, practitioners who really want to help folks. And then there are some folks who are just kind of the hippie stoner type, who are just kind of,
it feels good. That's what I'm talking about, dude. It's a tool. Those things are tools. And if you don't use them properly, like a shovel, if you bang your toaster with it, it's not going to work. You got to use the tool properly. And like, I think young people, this is why we need more education, I think, and course correction with psychedelics, because it really could help transform our country into a global superpower that it should be, like this kind of healing tactic. But for people that like, I'm just going to take it and sit in a room, like a lot of it has to do with communication. But my experience, my ultimate experience with psilocybin is with communication. If I do it and I'm alone and I'm just sad, it gets worse. And then I'm but when I'm able to like verbalize my, my problems, like where does this trash actually go that I'm looking at on the corner right now tomorrow? Like, what the fuck are we doing as a species? Right. And my friend's like, yeah, well, it goes to a trash dump. And then I'm like, okay, there's a response. Yeah. And then at least a responsibility. And that's my, so that's, so what's this? Yeah. Have you used psychedelics over the ages? Do you talk about it much?
I don't talk about it much, but I have had an experience. Like it removed, I am not an atheist by any stretch. I'm Catholic, but I always believed in God, pretty much always. Yeah. But that experience with 5-MeO removed any doubt, put it that way.
What'd you see?
So, well, 5-MeO doesn't really, you rarely have visuals. It's more of an experience, but I was in the presence of God. It felt that way. And I felt myself. It's really interesting. It's one of those, the thing, like there was a total ego death, I would say. And it was like, you kind of just cease to exist in a way, which is really strange. It's really, like so many things, is very hard to articulate. But I felt what I can articulate is I felt myself in the presence of God. And also maybe it is related to my, Christian upbringing, and is that I felt myself just apologizing and begging for mercy and I was repetitive, and it wasn't for anything in particular, like, look, we're all scumbags at some level or another. And it wasn't like, oh, I did some terrible thing and I was apologizing for that. Instead, it was simply just like, apologize for just being, a human being, I guess, like like a sinner, like all of us. And I was just begging for forgiveness and mercy and grace. And I feel like I got it, which is pretty cool. And then, but it was very intense. It was very, very intense. I did the proper way with a proper guide who, is a friend of ours. And, yeah.
Having a guide is such an important part of psychedelic transformation.
Right. It was like a half day. I mean, it was just a one-time thing. But it was like pretty much my entire day. And 5-MeO is different. It wasn't like you went to the full retreat in Mexico. It was almost kind of done as more of like a demonstration. Like, okay, here's what this is. And it was a full day long process, but really, I mean, for 5-MeO, at least I was in and out in 20 minutes. And I was perfectly fine. Like afterwards, I came out of it and I was like a little woozy, like kind of like, holy shit. Okay. And I was like, my guide was like, go ahead, let's just walk outside. It was a nice day out. It's Southern California. It's beautiful. And the sunlight. Oh, it's nice. Touch grass, bro. Everything felt nicer. And then after that, I just kind of was contemplative and just had, talked about it, what it was like and what I went through, and explained all that. And yeah, it was amazing. It was amazing. And I'm
I smoked DMT. Yeah, in SoCal also once, my buddy's friend of a friend who was like growing algae in these tanks behind him, and I didn't blast off. I didn't take the huge inhale and hold it as long as you can until you're like, and then you see I didn't do that. I just puffed on it because I was like, I want to know what this is before I dive in. And I saw him being sucked down. Like I could tell that gravity's working on him, all of us. But I think we're desensitized to the perception of gravity because this is just what it is. But I could see like our skin, like this is not like, this is what happens when you're being sucked down. And I was like, wow, it gave me an objective perspective without gravity's interference. It was fascinating. And I felt very clean afterwards. I don't know how to explain the cleanliness. I felt clean.
Yeah, I felt, I mean, I guess you could say too. I felt somehow like redeemed or something like that in a way. And it was more, and it was just more real than real in certain ways. But also what's interesting about those is like, there's different, like you talked about, it's a very effective, powerful tool when used properly, and you have to have the right tool in the toolbox. And one of the most, I think, exciting, or I think promising of all those substances is ibogaine, from the iboga root, which I have not, I don't know much about it, but I know people that have. And apparently it is especially effective for addiction, including opioid addiction, which, as you can imagine, is a big fucking deal in this country. And everyone who's gone through it told me it was not pleasant. It was not cool. It was not fun. It was kind of horrific going through it. But when they came out on the other side, everything changed. And I think that there's some real promise with that. Unfortunately, it seems like it's one of the last things that's going to be decriminalized, if ever, mostly just because I don't think anybody really understands how it works. Nobody really does. But I think that is something that apparently makes a really, really, really big difference. But it's not something to be taken lightly. It's a multi-day event, apparently.
Yeah, I've heard it's the most hardcore transformative I don't even know if it's considered a psychedelic. Maybe it is. On the earth that they know of. It's like the one that will it will maybe like reset your personality kind of thing, where you become another human, another version of you.
Right. And that's where the setting and the guide, the preparation, all that stuff comes in to make sure you handle it properly. But I mean, again, I'm just speaking anecdotally. I've never touched it, never been around it, but I know folks that have. And apparently, I mean, look, man, it's like one of the things we do is like treating severe mental illness and and addiction. And it's like, look, if there was something that's out there that, if hypothetically that we, could flip a switch and go through a process as opposed to spending 30, 60, 90 days inpatient with us and all this other stuff. And it like essentially would like put us out of business, so to speak. I'd be fine with that. I'd be great. We'd all find another way to make a living. It would be like, but just the human factor in that, in the public good it would serve. I mean, you think about it, like, we've lost more people to, opioids, poisonings, and overdoses in the past, 2 years than we have in 10 years of the Vietnam War. That's bonkers, man.
Yeah. How many people were lost in Vietnam? Was it like
roughly? I mean, somebody could probably fact check, but I think about 50,000. So about 50,000 Americans were killed in action in Vietnam over the course of 10 years. By the way, we were there for 10 years. And I think we've lost I think in the past 2 years, we've lost 70, 80, 100. I mean, I don't know the exact number, but a whole hell of a lot more in a whole hell of a lot less time.
That's how many. And those are just death. That's just calculated deaths. Because the addiction itself is almost a kind of death sometimes.
Yeah.
Being stuck in that pattern.
And also
not really, but.
Well, no, I get it. But also the thing is a number of these deaths. And so this is something that is not that common knowledge, but it's true. Some folks pay attention to this, as maybe you or some of your listeners know this, is that so when you hear about those fentanyl deaths, is quite often it's not someone who is already an addict and struggling and going through this, and they've been through it for years. A lot of times they were casual drug users, right? Who it was laced with fentanyl, whatever they took. It might have been cocaine, ecstasy, or something, and it was laced with fentanyl because fentanyl is extremely cheap. But also 2 milligrams is a lethal dose, right? So, or potentially lethal, LD 50, they call it, lethal dose 50, which could kill you. And so the thing is, though, is people who are cutting drugs like cocaine, ecstasy, all PCP, you name a drug, Xanax, because it'll still give you a buzz, right? Or more than a buzz, right? But I mean, the guys who are chopping that stuff up aren't exactly working at the lab at Pfizer as far as making sure they get the dosage right. So usually when you hear about those deaths, it's quite often it's somebody who they were using cocaine or something like that, like maybe recreationally, right? Not big supporter of that, but I do acknowledge that there's some people who can and do occasionally recreationally use illicit drugs. Not recommended, and especially these days, because if it's laced with fentanyl, then it'll kill you. That's what a lot of those deaths.
It's coming in across the border. A lot of this fentanyl is coming in across the border, and like I think Vivek Ramaswamy was. What's that?
Chinese precursors, like the chemicals to make it, come to Mexico from China, and then it's mixed and made in China, and then comes over the border.
So Vivek phrased it as a poisoning. It's not like we're
exactly right.
It's like foreign agents are poisoning our population, or whether directly or indirectly. I mean, it seems pretty blatant. So it's like national defense. Like we need to wean off addiction for national defense, for chemical warfare. That's why iboga or iboga, I guess iboga is probably better pronounced, is so like drastically needed right now, or at least understanding it is drastically needed. It's like a defense mechanism, almost protecting ourselves with plants.
I mean, that's one way to look at it. I mean, for sure. But I mean, because it's usually when guys are really in the throes of addiction, that's the one where it's most useful. But you're right, it's the poisoning. Somebody might be an occasional user and they didn't know, I mean, I don't know, man. Like, have you ever been to a party before and somebody brought some cocaine?
Oh,
right. Yeah, of course. Right. Well, like, you don't know what you're getting. Right. And it used to be, you don't know if it's dilute or cut with pool cleaner or whatever. Well, now there's a good chance there's a real chance it's cut with fentanyl. And if you get a little bit more than you should, it wasn't mixed right, or you put too much fentanyl in there, then it's lights out. That's what the vast majority of deaths are. And that's what they talk about too. Like Cernovich, Cerno lives like 20 minutes from me, and we're friends. Over at the house and whatnot. And it was, and one thing he talks about a lot, he lost a friend, somebody who was smoking a joint that he thought was laced with PCP. It was laced with fentanyl, and he died.
What?
And yeah, a friend of his, this a couple of years ago, while he tweeted about it, so I don't mind mentioning it. But yeah, and so the thing is, though, is like you just can't be a casual drug user these days. It's just really unsafe. And the even more fucked up part is now in some places, in the really rough parts, like gas stations or liquor stores, they sell fentanyl test kits, so you can test your cocaine for your fentanyl.
I guess that's a good thing.
I suppose. But I mean, I guess it's like, harm reduction. But yeah, man. And what's crazy is that, so then I had a buddy of mine when I lived in DC, my last duty station was in the Navy, was in DC, and, it's where I met my wife and everything, is that we had a friend who used to work for Cato, and then he worked for the Reason Foundation, but he's like a data scientist, researcher type guy, right? And he did a bunch of research on drug policy. And he was telling me that like part of this research involves like looking at stats, but also like he would talk to drug addicts. He'd also talk to drug dealers, which is interesting. And they were telling him that whenever, and this is the drug dealers in Baltimore at the time, that whenever in a certain neighborhood, people would catch wind about addicts that were dying, like overdosing, like dropping like flies over, like let's say a certain week, all of a sudden, all these people just start dropping like flies from heroin or fentanyl overdoses, right? Well, that would bring in more people. They go to that neighborhood to buy, because the idea for some of these addicts was, whoever it is, so a shipment of the good stuff came in. That's the good stuff. And those other folks that died, they didn't know what the hell they're doing, but I do.
Oh, so it's the potent stuff, like a little less of it. State of mind.
I mean, that's the idea, but
yeah. Wow.
And so what also is crazy too, it got me on the fentanyl thing. I didn't know about this. There's a really cool article is written in, I want to say like 2017, maybe it was in Bloomberg on the fentanyl stuff. So to give you an idea, and this is what they propose in this, is that if you were to buy, to get just like kind of get your head around all this, is if you were to buy $1,000 worth of heroin, bulk heroin, right? Like wholesale, right? Let's say this is like from a business perspective. This is where it's kind of fucked up and morbid, but let's just be real, right? You can take $1,000 worth of bulk heroin, be about that big ish, right? You could chop it up, cut it all up, dilute it, do whatever you got to do. You could probably turn around that for a street value and sell it for about all in street value, about $25,000, right? Pretty good ROI, right? Well, if you bought $1,000 worth of bulk wholesale fentanyl, right, it would be like smaller than a ping pong ball, and you could dilute all that, and you could turn that much into 7.8 million. Yeah.
What? Just straight? Just selling fentanyl straight? Do people actually take fentanyl straight?
You'd mix it with other stuff, right? So you mix it into like cocaine, use it to cut cocaine or MDMA or, whatever you wanted. And it was just like, just kind of like give you an idea of the numbers. And so therefore, when you got an ROI that's that huge, you don't care about returning customers.
Oh my God.
You know what I mean?
So you put 1,000 of bulk fentanyl, and then they make 7.8 million in sales, but it's never sold by itself. So that they calculate in the cost of the other drugs.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm no drug expert or drug policy expert or anything like that, but yeah, that essentially what is explained to me. You could use that much, and a lot of times they'll create like fake material. Like it might be like MDMA in pills or like Xanax, like street Xanax. Just put a little bit of that in there instead of Xanax. Yeah.
And then they're working on this thing called norfentanyl, which is a more fentanyl. And like we talk about fentanyl, but I feel like this is just one step of the ladder up. And they're working in laboratories, to make more potent.
Well, and the thing is like, and here's just the reality is like opioids, including fentanyl, are phenomenal medical tools. Right? If you ever had surgery or you get severely injured, right? You're in the hospital, like, yeah, you'll appreciate fentanyl, like they'll throw a patch on you, in the military, they use those as well. Like they keep them really tightly controlled, but like the medics would have fentanyl lollipops. It was literally for a guy who's like, let's say you got, seriously fucked up, right? Like shot, missing limbs, stuff like that. And you're in pain. Doc will have a little fentanyl lollipop, like put that in your mouth. And all of a sudden the pain goes away. I mean, and it's like, they're phenomenal medical tools, but I mean, it's like guns, you know what I mean? Like in the right hands, they can be really used for good. In the wrong hands, they can be used for bad. Right.
When used for good, is it like a less addictive form of morphine? They used to give troops morphine, but it was like last resort. It got to the point where they were like,
I don't know if it's less addictive. I don't know about that. But the thing is, though, it's like, they'll wean you off it when it's done properly. Right. And that's another huge problem is guys who would get overprescribed. Hell, when I was at the Naval Academy, my senior year, I had shoulder surgery, right? My senior year, my last semester. And I threw it. I was on the boxing team. I was like a really lousy boxer. So I threw a lot of jabs that didn't land. So I ended up damaging my shoulder. And so I had shoulder surgery. And so I was in a sling and they gave me when I came out of it, they gave me some drugs. Okay. I was kind of woozy. And the next day, normal. And they gave me a prescription of Percocets, right? And I was just taking them like normal. Didn't know anything about this like opioid crisis. It was like in 2006. I didn't really know much about it. Didn't really care. And I was just taking the Percocet and I was like, feeling good, feeling great. Went to class, kind of like spaced out, like trying to pay attention in like, like a electrical engineering class, right? Where I'm just like hexadecimal system, far out, bro. Right. I got to see in that class. And then, but anyways, it was like, but they just kept refilling my prescription, and I wasn't taking too much. I just kept taking it. And I just show up like, oh, I'm out of pills. And then I went back to the pharmacy and got more pills and they gave me more. And after about, a few weeks of that, the pharmacy tech was like, wait, what? You come back in? And he's like, hold on a second. Goes in the back. Pharmacist comes out and he's like, yeah, you've had plenty of refills. You're done. And I was like, oh, okay. And then it was like, and then I felt like shit for a week. And then I realized, I was having like mild, like compared to what heroin addicts have to deal with. Right. Like I felt like a bag of hammered dog shit for about almost like 10 days, like flu, miserable, achy. And then I look back and I'm like, man, I was like kind of sheltered because I was at the Naval Academy. Right. Like, I was like, man, if somebody else was in a similar situation, somebody knew about that. It's like, I could see how somebody might want to go out and score some Percocet or something else. And and then you're just going down the trail of you're going down a road of pain.
Man,
You know?
I had a friend that was a recovering heroin addict, and he would go get this drug to wean people off heroin. It started with an M. I wish I could remember what it was called. Yes, it was methadone.
Yeah.
And he would like put a little in water in the morning and drink it, and that would be like his cravings would be kicked. And so one time I was like,
that's the problem.
Yeah. And so I was like, I'll try it. He was like, okay. So I tried a little methadone, and I was like, whoa, I'd never taken opiates before in my life. I mean, I took Percocet when I had my wisdom teeth for like 3 days, I think. And I was like, whoa, I was doing the deepest stretches. Like I see where like India, yoga, opium, it's all kind of like, I was like, whoa, I can do the ultimate stretching. And I felt like fluid, like liquid water moving. And it was like this amazing feeling. And I was loopy as fuck for like 2 hours. And then a couple days went by, 3 days went by, and I saw him again, and I was like, can I get some more of that? He was like, no. And he basically saved my life. Like that was my body. I wasn't thinking like, I got to get it. I was just like, that was an interesting experience I'd like to do again, just as a tool to go stretch again. And he was like, no, because he understood the addictive, and I appreciate him for that. So thanks for listening, dude.
And also there's so many cases though, where the thing is, and this is where I learned a little bit of grace and sympathy for addicts, because once you get to that point, I'm talking about opioid addicts in particular, and we've got a few dozen of them not far from where I am now who are going through treatment for all this, for all sorts of problems, but a number of opioid addicts. And it's like, I guess it's good because it's like, man, you see a ton of cautionary tales, but the thing is you feel for them, because usually when you're really in the throes of addiction, it's not that you miss the good feeling. You're just trying to stave off agony. That's what it's about. It's somebody like, because opioid heroin withdrawals or any sort of opioid withdrawals. I mean, dude, that's like, imagine like that you've got the worst flu and the worst hangover and the worst depression of your life. You'll feel like you're dying. You won't die. You'll feel like you're dying. You might want to die, and you're just in absolute utter agony and misery for days, usually at least a couple of weeks, and even after the initial onset, like you still feel like crap for weeks and weeks and weeks afterwards. And you get, and it's just like, I get it. When somebody's trying to like, get a plug, get a fix or something, it's not because they just miss getting high. It's because they're just trying to like not go through withdrawals. And that's the issue.
I bet a part of it is also like gravity sucks. I mean, gravity's awesome, but gravity hurts, man. We are being sucked. Like my posture is like I should be doing yoga daily. I should be stretching. And like, the opiates, I forget that pain. And then when I'm off of it, I was like, well, there's that feeling, there's that pain.
Yeah.
Having suffered a back injury or anything. So I can imagine, I can just begin to fathom what someone that suffered like an actual. What other stuff do you guys do at Miramar? We've been going an hour. I don't want to keep you too long, man, because we're about to shut it down. What's that?
You got to go grab Natalie. My wife is landing at the airport in about 15-20 minutes, so I'm gonna go grab her, but I mean, which is fine. She gotta get her back. She was at a wedding in Tennessee. Actually kind of funny, if I may, real quick. She was at a wedding in Tennessee for a friend of hers who's old friend of hers from high school, who's in the Army, and he met his now wife at a Turning Point event. I know you participated with Turning Point a little bit. It was
we just did AmFest.
It was at the Student Action Summit in Tampa, and they're big fans. That's where they met, and so they're big fans of Pasovic, who isn't, and so that's kind of how I got involved in knowing people in the online rights, because Jack was my Intel guy back in the day. He was one of our Intel guys back then. So
that's awesome.
Each other, and it was through him. We were both living in DC. We met folks and blah blah blah. And so it was really cool. So Pasovic was really nice of him. I hit him up like, dude, could you like just send him a little video message? And he like wrote like, hey, Chris and Emily, right? Heard you guys met at Turning Point, blah, blah, blah. He said a couple nice, really sweet, funny things for him. And then I sent it to them on the wedding it was on Saturday, and totally made their day. So it was really cool.
Dude,
it was nice.
I love cool. Poso, man.
Poso's
the kind of guy where like,
awesome.
If we lived in like a normal world, Poso would just be a bassist in a badass rock band. Like, but he's forced to become this like speaker of righteousness because the world needs people like that right now.
Yeah, man. Yeah. He's fantastic. They spent Jack and Tanya and the kids. They spent Labor Day weekend out here with us in Newport Beach, and we went to Universal. It was a good time. It was fun stuff, man. But okay, but your original question, other stuff we're doing at Miramar, so that we're doing right now.
Actually, one of the super chats from Philip Fisher. What have been the most successful types of therapy you're doing so far?
You know, man, like I said, and this is kind of the feedback I'm getting from clinicians, is and it's not the best answer, Philip, but this depends. It depends on the person, depends on what they're going through, depends on what their issues are. I got to say as well, but one thing also is unlike a lot of therapy out there that you might find in the regular world, when you go kind of talk about your problems, the vast majority of our patients are men, and they're generally come from a type A personality male situation. So we do try to have a lot of positive male energy in the room, and we talk about accountability and giving them purpose. So, again, I'm not a doc, not a therapist, but I got members of the team that are fucking fantastic. I mean, really are. And that's one of the things we really do. And I think just kind of set them on the right track and purpose. But of course, we do CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, which is another different form. We've had progress as well with EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization. I forgot the R, but what it is, it involves making your eyes move, which it is sometimes you'd either look at a light bar, or some folks will wear an Oculus or something like that, or you can even use your finger. But what it is you do talk therapy through trauma, and you talk about it's meant for acute trauma, right? Not just my mom and dad didn't love me. That's a real problem, but we're talking about a combat situation. Maybe you're in a terrible car accident, sexual assault victimization, something like that, right? And what you do is you talk through that whole therapy. And while you're moving your eyes, and it does some weird, one weird trick, right? That kind of rewires your brain. And you almost like Total Recall, where instead, a buddy of mine was telling me about it. And he said what they did is it was a situation where one of his friends was killed in action, and he was there. And instead of him getting killed, he even told me, I thought it was hilarious. It's kind of weird. Is instead of him being shot and put in a helicopter, he left and then came back and brought back pizza for everybody, which I know that sounds weird, but it's almost like replacing those memories in a way, but in a positive way, even though intellectually it's still there, what happened, but from a deeper emotional perspective, it does that. So we have EMDR, and that's not a one and done thing. It usually takes at least a month of doing it once or twice a week, for at least a month when we work through it. It's a whole program. We have guys that go through that sort of stuff as well. Group therapy, individual activities. We send guys to the beach a lot. Getting in one with nature and whatnot as well. We do a lot of things, but also when somebody shows up, it's based on that. We don't cookie cutter the program. Every program's custom tailored for that particular event when it comes through. So yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Balls are the brain. It's one creature. If you look at it, they're just little phalanges sticking off the brain, brain sensors.
Yeah.
Dude. And the spine too. The brain and the spine and the eyes are all one creature. It's one organism floating in the salt water. We got two more super chats. I want to. What's that?
About that, how your brain, your eyes, your spinal cord, and your nerves are all the same organ, essentially.
Yeah. Have you ever seen it pulled out of the body? Just a unit? It looks like a jellyfish. We were these floating, probably genetic creatures in the salt water, and we were let's build an amoebic sac around our salt water and carry it out onto the land with us. And now we're tugging on this muscle.
Well, yeah. Well, I learned something as well. What's crazy? Here's one about your nervous system, how it's all one big organ. Is how you ever touch something maybe a hot burner or something like that. Oh crap, that's hot. And you pull it away real fast. The circuit that goes from your hand touching the hot thing, the circuit to you realizing it's hot and pulling it away, that circuit doesn't even go to your brain yet. It's in your spine, essentially. So it's so fast. So, lots of times before you even realized, you notice that. It's kind of wild that. And how people are automatically scared of snakes. You see a snake, even a rubber snake or something hydro, right? People freak out. It's not even that circuitry in your brain that goes from your eyes seeing something, your brain saying, oh, that is a snake and that is dangerous to me. I need to get away. It's it's right there. It's like reptilian brain. Wow.
I imagine that could be used for therapy if we can figure out how to affect like the bodies, because the trauma lives within all the muscles, the fascia, and the nerves and things, and then that'd be a cool form of undoing body trauma in some way.
Oh yeah. Yeah, like I said, I always got to put a disclaimer on all this stuff because, and I'm not just trying to be like all legalist covering my ass or anything like that. I mean, it's just simply, it's one of those things where it's like, hey, I'm here to create the organization and we've got the team for it. It's pretty great.
Oh man, this is another one from Myth. What's that? Yeah, do people really see gnomes on DMT? Tom, I'm not an expert on it. Yeah,
I'm not either. I'm no expert. So the answer, people tell me they do.
Gnomes.
Or like
humans,
elves, I guess.
Yeah, elves and gnomes.
Yeah, man. I don't know.
Coiling, vibrating substructures that resemble hominids. Let's find out. Maybe I'll do that one. I plan on that in the future. I'll let you know. Here's one from Insight of the Ages saying in the USAF, U.S. Air Force, I was put on Percocet and other damaging pharma for 4 years. High doses, I felt, used for experimentation. Now 420 could get me fired.
Well, I mean, that's I mean, yeah, man. I mean, I'll tell you, I think, and this comes down to a lot of different things is, there's no money in you smoking weed for anybody, where pharmaceuticals, obviously somebody's making money. Wow. I know that sounds cynical, but I think that's just kind of it.
I think it's follow the money. That phrase isn't invented for nothing. Tom, it's been really great, man. It's always awesome good to see you, dude.
Always good to see you. Would love to. How long are you in Florida for?
Probably another week.
Okay, got it.
Let me know if you're here. Do you come to Florida frequently?
I do, but especially now that we have the place in Claremont. It's outside of Orlando, but that's a bit of a hike. It's it's a few hours down to South Florida where you are. But I definitely might want to make the trip out there. I know Luke's out there as well.
Yeah, so I'm at Luke Rutkowski's place now. He wants to have you on his show. We should organize. Maybe I'll come down while you're out. That'd be cool.
Yeah, I would love to. Out there a lot,
right,
and then you'll be back up in Maryland or the DC area.
Fuck
back there.
Yes,
nice,
ladies and gentlemen. Tom Sauer.
Good place.
What's
to spend,
that?
January. Good place to spend January, Miami.
Yeah, dude, it was dark and cold for like I forget how valuable sunlight is and warmth.
Oh, dude, that's why I love it here. Look, if you humor me here, that's why I love Southern California. I mean, it's 72.
Every day. Wow,
yeah,
look at the sky.
I know it's gorgeous.
There's only that one. There's that one contrail. Wait. Is it a contrail? That is that condensation trailing off of a jet. That's what that is.
Not chemtrails.
No, not chemtrail. Contrails. Very different.
Yeah, man.
All right, Tom. Have a good day, man. Everyone else listening, like the video, follow Tom's work. The links are in the description. It's Miramar Health. You can get in touch through the website, I'm sure.
And also Valor Lakes Health. If you're in the Florida area, if you're in Central Florida, we're also at Valor Lakes Health. And we're out there. Got a phenomenal team out there as well.
Oh, super cool. Valor Lakes Health. Thanks, man. And like the video, share it around, subscribe to everything, follow us both. Have a good time, everybody. See y'all later.
See you guys.